Hey guys, so something that I feel like there should be more videos on is the difference between NTPs and NTJs. The reason that I feel like this distinction is so important is because NTs from the outside can seem pretty similar to one another, right? Like they're both speaking the same like weird, abstract, intuitive language, and they're both like logical to a fault, like to the point where they have just no common sense. Like like all NTs are the types to argue that like Hitler should Hitler was right or something, you know. So they can seem similar from the outside, and they tend to occupy the same spaces, I guess. Like they tend to be interested in a lot of the same things. But once you get to know them, you realize that they are very, very different. At least that's been my experience. I am an NTP. E or I. I don't know. You guys can argue. I haven't decided. Um, and before I knew about the MBTI, and before this happened enough times for me to start expecting it, I would like meet an NTJ and I would be like, "Oh my god, like you're just like me, like finally," you know. But then you would really get into stuff. You would really start talking to them about things, and like I would think that I would know where they were gonna go with stuff. Like I would be like, "Oh, I know you're about to say this," and then they would just say something completely different. And I would just realize that they were thinking through things completely differently from how I was, which they were, because actually NTJs and NTPs share zero cognitive functions. Their ways of coming to conclusions are completely distinct. Um, so yeah, I thought I would just tell you about my experiences. I actually know a pretty unusually high amount of NTs, and I think that's for a couple of reasons. The first one is I went to a sort of like math themed high school. Like it wasn't, I don't know, it wasn't really like a specific program, but it had math and science in the name, and we had like a really nice chem lab and robotics team. Like it was just sort of for people who liked math and science in general, so that attracted quite a few NTs. But even more than the school was high school debate. High school debate is insane. It's its own little dimension. It is an alternate universe. Um, I would say probably 70 to 80% of the kids were NTs, which is crazy because in the normal population it's like 5-10%. And I actually think there were more NTJs than NTPs, probably because I think that NTJs like trophies more than NTPs. And I also think that TE likes like dichotomies more than TI, like the affirmative, negative, like right versus wrong. I think that TE tends to like that more than TI, but there were plenty of NTPs also, and sort of in debate, you get to see how people are thinking through things, right? Like explicitly thinking through really complicated problems. You get to see them like on a stage being like, this is how I came to this conclusion, this is how I came to this conclusion. And I did high school debate when I was like 15 to 18 probably. So it was before I even knew about the MBTI, but I started to notice these differences. Um, the biggest difference, in my opinion, is definitely TE versus TI. It's kind of interesting because the difference between a perceiver and a judger in any type is perceivers are internally organized, internally consistent. See, that's kind of a misconception. People think that perceivers are sort of random and unorganized, disorganized, but it's actually that their organization is inside of themselves, okay? The things that they say have sort of a lot of consistent patterns. If you really get down to it, it just doesn't really reflect in the external environment. So their bedroom might look like this. Oh, it's not even that bad right now. It's usually worse. Uh, but they actually have pretty consistent patterns in their behavior if you really like dissect it. Whereas judgers are externally consistent. They look for yeah, external consistency. They check the patterns of the outside world, and perceivers sort of they thrive in like chaos. Like you can just throw whatever you want at them because they approach very changing problems in similar ways, whereas judgers, they sort of get used to their environment and they start to work within the boundaries of the environment that they become accustomed to, right? um, and what was I talking about? TI versus TE. So TI is internally consistent and it draws from the self and sort of what these like what the TI user has discovered to be always universally true, and it's more logical, whereas TE is more like factual. In that TI looks at like cause and effect. It looks at how things relate to one another, and that's what logic is. It's, you know, if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. It's not you know, felines have felines are carnivorous. Okay, that is TE. That is a fact. That is based on the circumstances of the planet Earth and the felines which have evolved there, whereas A equals B, B equals C would exist regardless of what happened to happen on the planet Earth. I don't know if that makes sense. I guess that TI is just always universally true and applicable to pretty much any situation, whereas TE is only applicable within the bounds, within the sphere in which it's being argued. And for that reason, there were a couple of different types of debate. One of them looked at more at like current actual like issues in reality, whereas the one that I did was a philosophical debate, and it would ask questions like, is it wrong to be, what is it called, an accessory to somebody's suicide? What is that called? Assisted suicide. Like, is assisted suicide wrong? Which is just much more universal and applicable to a variety of scenarios than the NTJs, which is, should the U.S. invade Bolivia tomorrow? You know, um, it's kind of, it's interesting because you only see, or for the most part, you see people's extroverted functions, especially extroverts, and you don't really see their internal world. So NTJs will seem much more logical and thinking than they are, whereas NTPs will seem way less thinking than they are. When I write, I tend to seem way more serious and like logical than when I just speak. It looks like I'm just coming up with random shit because it's NE that's extroverted. Whereas with NTJs, their relation to the world is TE rather than their intuition. INTJs, especially, are not that logical when you really get to know them. They have this crazy, really nebulous, disorganized world inside of their mind, really fluid world inside of their minds. And they don't know exactly why they think things, they just sort of do. And they have this sort of like little NIFI world that's really difficult to explain to other people, but they come off as very harsh and very simple to other people. People tend to think that NTJs are way more simple than they actually are. Um, when you really get to know them, you're like, why did you move to California? You know, they'll be like, oh, you know, like I like the beach, and because my job was there, when in reality it's for all these crazy NIFI reasons, you know. NTPs as perceivers are way more interested in just understanding things for no reason. NTJs will usually, NTPs love bullshit. That's what they live for. They will just sit and just talk about things for no reason. They have no intention of it being constructive in any way, of it changing anything in any way, whereas NTJs will sort of take it as a challenge to the past, I guess, the past ways of thinking about things. If an NTP comes up to an NTJ and is like, "Hey, like, what if humans evolved from like rhinos?" An NTJ will think that NTPs have seriously like sat down and thought about this and want to like revise all of the like journal, like the NTJs will assume that the NTPs mean that the NTPs are calling every scientist of the past a liar, basically. Whereas NTPs, they live in the world of hypotheticals and they just can bullshit from night till day. Um, Day till night, I guess. If you're not nocturnal like I am, it's, let's see, 12:40 right now. That was relevant. NTJs care about authority. I was actually talking to an INTJ last night, and we were talking about Bill O'Reilly, and I was like, yeah, I don't know why people debate Bill O'Reilly. He's crazy. And he was like, yeah, I don't know what credibility he has. And I was just like, oh man, an INTJ using the word credibility, like, It's very, very typical. They look at authority a lot more than TI users do. NTJs do come to their own conclusion, but they have sort of a respect for anybody who they look at who is saying things and the sources of information more than TI users do. TI users tend to just look at how logically consistent things are, regardless of who said it, right? Um, NTJs look at measurable external achievement. So, like I was saying, they tend to like trophies, and they tend to have a thing a little bit more than NTPs for like money and status, especially the ENTJs. God damn it. The ENTJs I've known have been bulldozers. They have been just bulldozers of achievement. And it might not just be like money. Usually it's not money. Usually the things that NTJs respect are like degrees. Okay, they tend to live in the educational realm, but it'll be more like hard evidence. Like, look, I went to school. Whereas an NTP is like, well, I learned, so I don't care if I flunk out or not because that's just a piece of paper. That's just an external validation, right? NTJs tend to care about that more than NTPs. Um, NI is much more directional. It's sort of like this singular road. I think it's sort of like SI. SI, if you think about it, is sort of ultimately like a harmony, like a sort of balance between things physically. You know, like it's not too hot, it's not too cold. NI is the same, but it's conceptual. It's in the meaning of things. And so even NTJs, I mean NFJs are sort of known to be this way, but NTJs are constantly looking for where like the meaning of their life and where they should head next, and they sort of have this intuitive like sixth sense, like I'm in the wrong place in my life, like I need to move on. NTPs don't even pay attention to what they're doing, like themselves, like they don't pay attention to their own lives, like they're NE, they're trying to understand other things, they're trying to understand how a bike works. Whereas NTJs are like, what am I gonna do next year? You know, NE users in general are gonna get more and more. Even INTPs, even the introverted variants, are going to get more and more excited as they talk about ideas, and they're gonna move more, and they're gonna start, fucking vibrating. I remember somebody describing me as vibrating all the time because I'm just like, whenever I get excited about anything, whenever I start talking, I get more and more animated. Whereas an NI user, if they're thinking really hard about something very difficult to grasp, they'll get more still. And like you'll see them reclude within themselves and be like if you really ask an NTJ to think about something, they'll be like this for like 3 hours, and then they'll come out and tell you their answer. Whereas an NTP will be like, I don't know, what about this or this or this? What do you think about this? What do you think about this? And they just like to discuss things and bounce things off of other people, even the INTPs. Um, What else is there? FE versus FI. ENTPs are probably the best of all the NTs at seeming normal because they at least have tertiary FE, so they have the highest of the NT types understanding of external expectation, emotional expectation, social expectation. Um, I mean, they still kind of suck. It's pretty rudimentary, but it's there. Something that I've discovered is that when you get an NTP drunk, they get more extroverted. I think it's because the feeling parts of the brain tend to come out. When you get drunk, they get more extroverted, whereas ENTJs and INTJs tend to get more introverted when they get drunk because of the FI. I'm serious. It's something that I've noticed. It applies to everything, like SFPs and SFJs. SFJs will get more extroverted when they get drunk. SFPs will get more introverted. I don't know. Maybe that's just my experience, but that's something that I've seen. But I don't know, the NTJs pay more attention to individual stigma. So I guess the connotations that they've built with things throughout their lives. So like if when they were younger, I think it was the Mirror Parade, I think is her username now. She brought up this example of like, if when you were younger, some kid with a yellow jacket bullied you, like now you might hate yellow. NTJs are like that, and they're sort of unconscious functions, so they don't even know why they hate things or why they like things, but they have this sort of gravitational pull towards some things which they have positive emotional connotations with, and aversion to things that they have negative connotations with. And it's something that I don't know, if you like ask them about it, they'll come up with a rational reason, but that's not the real reason. Um, and they have a lot of ideas of who they are as people. Like an NTJ, they have a lot of self concept, whereas an NTP, they don't even consider themselves. They don't. Um, and when I was talking about with the perceivers and the judgers, how one sort of memorizes an external environment, the judgers, and lives within that, whereas that perceivers sort of live in this like um, world of universal truths. Um, I've had a lot of history professors who were NTJs, and I am so bad at history. I am unbelievably bad at history. I hate it, and I have to work very, very hard to get a passing grade uh, in a history class because there are very few consistent, like logical patterns in history. People say there is, but they're very broad and very simple. Like if you get a dictator, everybody dies, stuff like that. But you're not going to know much about the history of China from learning about the history of Persia. Uh, but NI can sort of soak up the circumstances of whatever situation it is presented. So, like, this is the environment that is Persia. Like, learn about it, and they can sort of understand these very complicated concepts, how they intertwine with each other when it's not necessarily logical. Um, but then they're the toughest graders because, God, I had this INTJ professor, and oh man, she would just give us like a notebook, and then she would ask us like 3 questions for like the entire semester, but they would be like, what is virginity in Islam? And then you would just you don't know how much you're supposed to write, but you're supposed to write something. Doesn't believe in multiple choice. But then if you ever say anything that isn't factually specifically correct, like you get deducted points because of the TE. Like it's oh my god, I got a B minus in that class, and I was really proud of myself because it was rough. Anyway, sorry, it's late, and I am rambling. I guess I just have so many opinions on this. It's not very well organized. I don't really know how to separate um, all of the distinctive differences between NTPs and NTJs. So I guess I've rambled for almost 18 minutes. Oh, the thing that I've neglected to talk about is SI versus SE. I think when it's an unconscious function, I think SI and NPs and SE and NJs, it's something which affects them emotionally, but they don't really understand. So, if you have an NP drive through their old hometown, they'll get all this like nostalgic stuff in their subconscious, and they'll know they're feeling something, but they won't know why, and they won't know what they're feeling exactly. Whereas like somebody with suppressed SE, if I don't know, like some kid comes up to them and starts like picking on them, like their SE will notice like the power differences, but they won't really know why they're affected by it. You put an NTJ in their old hometown, they'll forget the experience in 10 minutes, whereas the NP will constantly be remembering that and constantly be thinking about, remember when I went to my hometown 3 years ago? And like they'll know it will have affected them somehow, but they don't know how. Whereas the SE user, like, yeah, if somebody comes up and it like gets up all in their face and is like activating that SE, they'll keep remembering that one instance, and they'll know that it really affected them on like a really deep level, but they won't be able to articulate why, and they won't understand it. Whereas an NP, if that happened, they would just forget about it the next day, and they'd be like, whatever, because they don't have any SE in their like, deep in their psychological like abyss. All right, I think I'm done. Tell me your thoughts. Thanks.